Hello and welcome to Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Today, I am delighted to welcome back one of our valued industry partners, George Mothema, the CEO of BARSA, the Board of Airline Representatives of South Africa, who represents the interests of international, regional and local member airlines and ground handlers to government, airport operators and stakeholders in the airline industry. Today, ahead of the annual BARSA conference, we're going to dive into some of the key discussions that we're going to find ourselves discussing at the conference. I will be there in person as well, which is really exciting. Welcome back to the podcast, George.
Thank you, John. Always lovely chatting to you.
Perfect. Yeah, likewise, we always get so much from these conversations. I think before we go into the actual conference itself, it's been a year or so since we spoke. So let's talk a little bit more holistically about the recovery of airlift and tourism. There's been conflicting messages in terms of the recovery when it comes to South Africa's recovery of tourism post-COVID and the numbers versus 2019. And there's been bright spots and particular source markets. But how would you overall evaluate the progress South Africa's seen in the last couple of years?
It's quite interesting, John, that you asked this particular question. We just came as BARSA. We sit representing the aviation sector within the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Tourism Business Council of South Africa is obviously, as you would know, a leadership business organization that represent business in terms of the key issues around tourism. And Minister has actually, and we funded this from a Tourism Business Council of South Africa point of view, a project management team to assist the Minister of Tourism in terms of developing just a framework and strategy on tourism and obviously as a whole for the benefit of South Africa. Obviously looking at the different source market, we generally obviously looked at Europe previously, but we've seen some improvement from the US market. You know that we did the Trevor Noah campaign, which also has really looked quite good for us. The debate we currently have, John, is very simple from a project management point of view, is whether or not are we really looking at tourism recovery purely from the 2019, from a South African point of view, just the pre-COVID, because we always do that comparison of 2019, whether we're back to the 2019. But we've actually looked at these within our own the numbers of tourism even before 2019, which were pretty good, because the number for 2019, I just don't have the figures with me at this point in time. 2017 was much greater. We could see that from 2010 to 2017, we were sitting at a particular number, but 2019 we dropped slightly, and we now focus on recovery purely on the 2019 figures, and as opposed to going back to what is it that we were doing as a country that was enabling us to be able to have that trajectory of the 2017 numbers. We, from a business point of view, we would like to look at it that way. Obviously, we're not there yet, and I'm sure you're aware of a number of issues that obviously would impact South Africa, the US-South Africa relationship at this point in time. We hope that can be salvaged. It's something that obviously is bothering us as a country. So we've got our own domestic problems. We've got our own geopolitical issues that we need to resolve that would really speak to the numbers going forward, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I agree with you. Obviously, the World Cup has a lot to, in a positive way, in terms of really shining the light on South Africa and bringing that flow. But also, as we all know, it's an incredible tourism product. But also, it was a market that was particularly badly affected because of its geographical location and its reliance on the long haul traffic, which does take time to come back. And it is something that like you say, you guys continue to work on. If anybody hasn't seen that Trevor Noah advert, I suppose it is, I'll put a link actually in so you can watch the YouTube video. It's brilliant. I'm sure you all have seen it because it was a really smart way to advertise South Africa. So let's talk a little bit more about the forum itself, because that will obviously lead itself into some of the other discussion points. So the theme this year is shaping tomorrow's aviation today. What are the priorities as we sit here in February 2025 for BARSA? What are the top things that you are working on that you want to see progress in during the process during this year?
Thank you, John. It's good, John, that we started on tourism because we chose our particular location was purely intended to try and drive this particular province, if you know it in South Africa, Mpumulanga, which is where you find the Kruger National Park. It is a good tourism market for, in particular, our greatest source market, which is Europe. So we're trying to really build into tourism into that particular province. We don't have as much, obviously, in terms of the airport infrastructure there. We believe that by partnering with government, it would obviously help and awaken the sensitivity around the fact that there is a need in order to service that market, that airports of the province needs to be improved to some extent. Hence, we chose as a province. We started initially with Cape Town, obviously promoting, having partnered with Grow, the point-to-point traffic for the Western Cape market. We've done it in Joburg last year. 2025, we decided we want to try and build tourism into Mpumalanga. There is quite a lot for a lot of people to learn and see in that province. There are gems that need to be discovered for the province. And again, one of the things that we're looking at, even from a tourism point of view, going back to that particular issue, is really the untapped tourist market in Africa. South Africa has always been focused quite generally on Europe and now building into the US market. But we've got this untapped markets. We've got the Chinese market as it is, Asia as a continent. We've got Africa that we've really not tapped into. Obviously, as you rightly said, the challenge we have is that we're at the end of the hemisphere. It's always a challenge for us. We're long haul and so on. But some of the partnership that we can try and build with some of the African countries, we know, we identify some of the tourist hotspots or tourist countries. You look at Namibia, those kind of partnerships are quite important for us. So what are we looking at this year? Obviously, for us, the key issues and for us to have decided on shaping tomorrow's aviation today is really on a number of key issues that we're currently dealing with as a country. If we look at the navigation, the ATNS, which is obviously responsible for the navigation services in South Africa, in itself is in a state that requires a whole lot of work that needs to be done. We've obviously pleaded with the Minister for an intervention. There is a number of instrument procedures, flight procedures that have not been developed and neglected for over a period of 5 to 10 years. And we've got situations where most of the domestic airlines have not been able, during bad weather, to land into some airports because there are no instruments that have been designed. We've just been hit. Secondly, when we look at another different issue that we're looking at towards the future is that we have the South African Weather Services, which is really a key service provider to the aviation industry. I'm not sure if you're aware that they were hit by a cyber attack, and obviously we couldn't get the service that we pay for. In South Africa, we use the user pay principle. We pay for the services, and we demand, obviously, that there must be some accountability from a government point of view. It's one of those key issues that we're particularly looking at. We're looking at efficiencies in overall, if you can. I'm mentioning some of the state-owned entities so that you can understand that the whole idea and that discussions that we want to tailor for the summit really tailored around or centered around enhancing efficiencies within state organs, sustainability and collaboration across the aviation industry. Our priorities, as I said, is the state-owned entity, which is the key infrastructure providers. AXA, as it is, we've had a number of challenges. As you are aware, we've had to deal with issues around the infrastructure that's really requires a lot of maintenance to be provided. We had situations where fuel could not be pumped because a valve is not working for some reasons or another. And we've actually then requested AXA to obviously upgrade its systems in terms of making sure that there is maintenance around it. It's those little efficiencies, this pocket of issues that are impacting on efficiencies because you have an aircraft that's coming from wherever, London, and lands and there's no jet fuel. You can imagine what that does in the overall schedule of an airline. If you've got KLM Air France landing here, which is supposed to go back because it has other destination to go to, and they don't find fuel here, they have to obviously divert and tanker somewhere else. It's those kind of efficiencies that we're really focusing on. We need that. On the government side, just as a broader discussion we want to focus on is really the regulatory framework. It's biggest concern that we've had has been really around the processing of the foreign operators permit we've had a number of situations where airlines end up deciding not to put certain aircrafts into the South African market purely because of the time it takes to process a permit. You can imagine you want to schedule a particular aircraft, you want to increase. Let's think about Qantas, for instance, wanting to bring an A380, obviously increasing capacity and all that, but it takes forever to get a license being issued by a government. That in itself also impact on whether or not that airline would continue to will decide whether to continue to invest into this market or take that aircraft and put it elsewhere. So we're losing as a country, and we want those kind of discussions in order to make South Africa a better country, in order to make aviation a better industry. We want those kind of discussions to be debated. One issue which is maybe a bit sensitive at this point in time, but we believe from a regulator, from what needs to be discussed, as you would have obviously read around the domestic laws in terms of the FlySA fare and the other airlines, Airlink and the rest, that particular issue in itself obviously has brought a matter that really requires some attention from government in terms of resolving that, in terms of the shareholding arrangement that needs to be made, whether there's compliance, there's non-compliance, whether or not do we need to still maintain those kind of limitations. That I don't know. It's not for us to decide, but we want the industry to debate those kind of issues and say, look, compared to other markets, we believe that perhaps we need to a little bit open the skies in a way, so to allow the market to be serviced correct. Thank you, John.
Yeah, wow. There is so much going on. I think to your final point, that is something that it already feels like it's going to play out through litigation and obviously through the government processes and everything else. But a decision, as you quite rightly say, has to be made. And obviously a 12-month reprieve gives some time to have those conversations, and some of it's being played out publicly and some of it is not as well. I think to your wider point, the exciting thing, like you said, about the domestic and regional opportunity is absolutely where we're aligned with you, where I've always believed from the start of Aviate that that's where the growth and the opportunity is. Domestic and regional connectivity, and then of course the tourism that's driving that and that can exist off the back of it as well. And you think about how South Africa is connected now from other African carriers, with Kenya Airways flying a lot more than it used to, Ethiopian the same. And okay, that's partly because SAA isn't doing what it used to do in terms of that intercontinental, but there is African connectivity, there is African feed there, definitely. I think those new markets are really interesting. Like we're talking a lot at the moment about the interest from the Indian market, the Asian market, the Middle Eastern market. And that's starting to really make a difference in East Africa, but I can see that making a difference in South Africa very soon as well. And then the final point on the state-owned entities, I think it's about having confidence in the system. And if the airlines feel that the system is fragile and could snap at any point, or it's inefficient, or it's slow, or whatever it may be, that will impact the perception of doing business with South Africa, which I think the perception of doing business in South Africa is still very good. But the more experiences you have as an airline with these kind of things, the less likely you are to have that same perception, right? It becomes a perception rather than the actual reality. So I think putting those people together makes sense, and building that resilience with the state-owned enterprises definitely makes sense. I suppose my question off the back of this is, what's holding that back? Is it because we want to continue to work in silos, or is it just if we had a magic wand and loads of cash, would that fix most of these problems?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, to be quite honest, John, I think the lapse in the system, starting from a government point of view, has resulted in some of these problems that we have to deal with and the efficiencies that we see currently. And that's really what's really holding us back. Some of the challenges that we face, obviously, are challenges that I think almost everybody else faces. Let's take ATNS. And that's a debate we were having again with the South African Weather Services as well. Specialized skills, such as the air traffic controllers, we've been losing quite a lot in South Africa. And obviously going into other markets that pays them well. And that entire pipeline that was built over the years as part of the South African aviation, where a pipeline of air traffic controllers starting from the junior guy to the middle guy up to the senior guy, has actually been impacted because of this attrition. And I think, what is it that we haven't done much about it as a country to try and prevent that from happening, whether or not we can be able to afford to pay for them? Ultimately, the whole issue with us as an industry that we're paying for the services, how do we get to a structure that retains such key specialized professionals? Weather services is talking about the same on meteorologists and so on, that they are facing similar problems where there's obviously better pay elsewhere in the world and they're losing people in that space. And all these people are servicing the industry. I think, in my view, some of these decisions outside the COVID-19 situation, we know obviously COVID impacted on everybody else. But I think the larger part of the holdback is as a result of some of the decisions that were made in the past, and therefore certain things have not been maintained. Let's speak briefly, John, without really dwelling that much on ATNS. I give that as an example because obviously the cost to the industry is quite huge. You can imagine not being able to land because there are no procedures that have been designed, but the aircraft that are designed to be able to land in such weather conditions. But because it will be illegal to land, because you don't have design procedures that are approved by the South African Civil Aviation Authority, the cost to the industry is quite huge. If you look at that, the fact that you've got all these procedures that were neglected over a period of time, and now we find ourselves operating under the alternative means of compliance with some of the biggest airport and the secondary airports that are feeding into the primary airport. That in itself cannot be a COVID-19 situation. Definitely is the inefficiencies that you find in the system. And it's those little things that I believe that we need to talk about and fix them so that the industry, at the end of the day, airlines, all they need, in my view, I always say that we don't even need the airport and everything. We just want to land and, and bring passengers and so on. But at the end of the day, all we need is very simple, is have airports that are modernized, that have the right technology, that have things like e-gates, for instance, simple things as that enable the processing of people. Talking about that, one of the greatest inefficiencies that we had to deal with as an industry is the border management systems that are within the South. They introduced an IT system that was becoming dysfunctional. I'm sure you've seen long queues in OR Tambo where we had to intervene, and even as the intervention of the commissioner as well as the minister in making sure that systems are such that they enable the processing of the passengers to be easy. You can imagine, let's talk Emirates or any of the airlines. When they offer a service, they're offering the product they offer should be a seamless type product that is not only just being on an aircraft, but how a passenger get processed when they get into the airport. Is those inefficiencies there that we've been talking about and that we believe that the industry needs to talk about. We're seeing some changes with the new Minister of Home Affairs, obviously, on the visa side, which is really quite interesting for us. But it's really those kind of things that have been holding the industry back. And we believe those things are within our control. So John, what we're trying to do is that let's have a discussion about things that are within the control of the industry. The geopolitical issues are not within our control. It is between governments and so on. But there are issues such as these inefficiencies we talk about that we have control of making sure that we fix these little things. We make South Africa become a better place in terms of facilitating air transportation.
Yeah, look, it's a hugely connected process, aviation, and your point on what Emirates offers or whatever airline it is, the whole experience by the passenger is treated as the Emirates experience. If they had a great trip on the plane, but it takes 3 hours to get their bags, Emirates, they'll say, "Oh, I had a terrible flight because my bags took 3 hours." It's got nothing to do with them. They employ a ground handler, but ultimately that sits with the airport. That sits with the ground handling company. Same with the border management. That sits with border management agency. So all of these little things go into that experience. But again, to your point, if it's so bad that the airline is being blamed for it, the airline's got to start asking those questions, which is exactly what your forum is all about. It is a platform for the airlines to say, look, we're not completely in control. We understand that. You can't be a control freak and work in airlines because your business is impacted by so many different external stakeholders, never mind the geopolitical and all of the uncertainties when it comes to fuel price and availability and things like that. So let's talk a little bit more about the event and the format as well, because you do a really nice job. I was there in Joburg last year. We try and come every year as well. It's really well delivered, really well planned. You do some lovely little touches. And I know you like to keep a few things as a surprise. So without letting too many sort of cats out the bag, what are the plans? How is it going to be particularly different? And anything you want to shine a light on for those who are already booked to come to the event?
Yeah, no, John, thank you. John, maybe just to complete on the last question, really, and this is really the center and the structure of our summit. The whole summit is actually centered around one thing. When we talk about shaping tomorrow's aviation today, for us, it's really how do we get to fix the value chain, which is exactly what you're speaking about, the entire value chain from your Transnet pipeline that delivers jet fuel to all the airports where we have those kind of frustrations and we have to engage government on that. It's really, as you rightly said, that the silo mentality is something that really needs to be fixed so that we get into a better space. We don't know. We've been asking questions on the jet fuel side. We depended largely on import markets. 70% of our jet fuel is imported in any case. 30% is one a particular refinery that's working, the Cape Town one as well. So you've got those two that are really contributing about 30% of our jet fuel. But that in itself cannot be sustainable, where South Africa used to have about 6-7 refineries. And what is government's plan around it? Hence, we're saying it is really fixing the entire value chain, because for us to be able to transport a passenger, we're dependent on jet fuel. We're dependent on airports. We're dependent on border management. We're dependent on navigation gas. We're dependent on the gas that provide weather services. And this is one thing that we've asked, John, and that's a part of the discussion on technological advancement and all that. The systems of the state-owned entities, because most of these are state-owned entities, why are they not connected? Each one is buying their own product, system, programs, whatever. How do we get to a space where there is a connectivity of these entities in such a way that there will be that seamless processing of things in the entire value chain? That's really the discussion for us. John, coming to obviously what is expected, as we always do, we're expecting that it will be definitely an interesting summit. What we've tried to do this year around, John, was to really avoid and because we have a number of conferences, and that's why we time ours at this point in time, and closely linked to South Africa's obviously state of the nation, the governing party, and now the GNU would have obviously then delivered the national objectives. And now we obviously, so we have the budget, which is interesting, that's been postponed. We expect some debate, interesting debate around the budget itself, and therefore that in itself should be part of the discussions that we get into when we get into our summit. We've tried to really bring, from the panelist point of view, different people as opposed to be circulating the same people every year. And circulating the same people, I'm not saying is a bad thing, but in the sense that you have to practically do a coordination with the others, like Aviadev, for instance. Look at what Aviadev has done so that there's no repetition of the same thing. The same people goes into the same conference, speak about the same thing, but no results. So one of the things we are trying to achieve, and we've said to the Minister of Transport, is that we want really the key state-owned entities with this value chain that we want to be debated, to be part of this process so that we can all find solutions. And because if we don't fix that, and if we don't have those key people that run the state-owned entities being part of the solution, it really doesn't help. But also, as you rightly said, we were impressing on government that we would like a broader participation, not just the ceremonial, come in, take photos, boom, you go. But even if that is because of programs of government, you still expect that the most senior people in government, who are responsible, by the way, for this regulatory frameworks and so on and so on, should be part of the summit for 2 days so that they're able to take resolutions. And what we always do, John, we always produce a report. We send these reports after every summit. So expect much. You will see some new people. We've brought in one of the topic. We always believe that there must be discussion around leadership just outside the aviation topics that we've put together. We've brought something that really we thought when we saw it last year with Professor Mahani, just on a leadership point of view, really just to get an education around it. We bring in some journalists, obviously, just to try and provoke some interesting conversation around the geopolitical issues, because ultimately, in as much as we don't have control, they impact on how we do business. And I think we want to close that kind of a panel at the end of the day, just as a message from the leaders who are able to talk about South Africa as an whole. Some of the self-inflicted problems we have in South Africa, we want the leadership panel to talk about those kind of things that we believe may be self-inflicted by the country itself. How do we resolve those kind of issues so that we contribute, just as an industry, contribute towards nation building for South Africa?
Yeah, look, I think the platform's amazing because it's very clear with what you do, and your point about building upon the other discussions is super important as well. It's why I try and go to all the African aviation events so we can work out where people are up to and pick up the baton and run with that and say, I heard this being mentioned at the previous conference, rather than starting at square one. You have this very much this focus. And I think it's amazing that if you've got this, which is about the Southern African or the South African operators, the airlines that are flying into the country as well, and if your government isn't going to sit down and take the time and listen to those people and their concerns and engage with them in that respect, how could they possibly spend that time better in those 2 days? There are things that are going on, but if you represent and support the industry, you have to be there and you have to listen. But it's easy for me to say that as a non-South African. And
Yeah.
I see it exactly the same in the UK. And let's hope that that sort of changes and there is some opportunities for these guys to be more involved. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting. We've only got a few weeks to go now. For anybody listening that is interested who hasn't registered yet, who is eligible to join the conference and where do they go to find out a bit more about how to get involved?
Okay, so what we practically looking at really is as I've already mentioned, I think some of the key people that we believe should be part of the program, because our program is really centered around efficiencies, which we find mostly with state-owned entities. We believe that they should be part of the summit, really, so that we can be part of the solution to some of those challenges. But we also expect professionals, academics, students that would want to learn and get to know and understand the industry as a whole. And we believe that they should be part of this program. We've done that from our side just to make sure that we involve the youth to a greater extent to be part of this, so that we can start building the leaders of tomorrow and so on. But for those that have not registered, we've got a website which they can go through, which would obviously enable them to be able to have a link. And our website is www.barsa.co.za. I think we can put it on the link. And for those that would want to have direct contact with us so that we can be able to send a link for registration, they can use our LinkedIn, which is BARSA in capital letters, basically. BARSA means Board of Airline Representatives South Africa. So it's BARSA. Thank you, John.
Amazing. Yeah. So that's BARSA, not Barca with a C, and that happens all the time.
Yes.
And then it's Barcelona, and people end up in the wrong place. So I'll put those links just to avoid any confusion. Those links will be in the show notes, so you can go and have a look there. Click straight through, go to the website, go and follow them anyway. Follow Barca on LinkedIn because they're pretty active on there, sharing news and updates about the industry as well. I'm super excited to be back with you next month and get some warmth and see beautiful Kruger and Mpumulanga. Been there luckily a couple of times before and can't wait to be back. But yeah, it's been great speaking to you, George, and best luck with the last few preparations, and we'll see you in Kruger next month.
No, thank you very much, John. I think one exciting thing, John, which I ordinarily don't want to talk about, but I'm quite happy to speak about, is really for the golf lovers. We've arranged a nice golf day in the Kruger National Park, so you'll be playing golf with lions. It would be quite interesting, but it's a beautiful golf course. And we've got an excursion as well, just for people to be able to do the morning checking animals that are there in the morning, those that are the big five. So those are really the social exciting things that are just part of the program, just on a social event point of view. I just thought, let me add that. It would be interesting. I hope you're joining the golf there, John.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the golf, but I'll do the wildlife. I don't think you want me on the golf course. Plus, I'm not sure my life insurance policy covers lion attacks. That's something to look at, I think, before I come. But I've seen the course and it is beautiful.
Yes.
So yeah, I think even if I could come and just sit in the golf buggy or walk around or caddy for you, George, maybe if you need a caddy, I'll be there.
Thank you, John. Thank you for
All
hosting
right.
us. We appreciate it, and thank you for all your listeners. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, George. And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. If you did enjoy the episode, as always, all that we ask is that you do hit the share button, share it with somebody through whatever means you would like to allow them to have a listen. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll be back for the next episode very soon. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.